Today is the day the Lord has made. Well, we're going to do Isaiah chapter 37 today. And this is a lesson in what faith can do. And how depending on faith is actually the most realistic thing to do in the time of a crisis. So there's going to be a lot of personal application, I think, today, as all of us have no doubt gone through times of crises, and maybe our faith was tested. And this will be a very interesting thing to look through, I think. Starting in verse 1, chapter 37. As soon as King Hezekiah heard it. Now this is what he heard when the emissaries returned from meeting with the Rabshakeh, when he was standing outside the walls of Jerusalem, and he was ranting and raving, and he was threatening, and he's cajoling, and the people were listening to him, and all fear was all over the land there. The emissaries come back to King Isaiah, and they report to him. And King Hezekiah's response was, he tore his clothes, he covered himself with that sackcloth, and he went into the house of the Lord. So sackcloth was this very coarse fabric, much like burlap. It was used when people were showing grief or repentance, and that's what Hezekiah, the king with all the luxuries of being a king, that's what he wears. And he sees the reality of the situation, that this huge force, this huge army is out there outside the walls. They are by the water source for the city of Jerusalem. And the first thing he does is he goes into the house of the Lord. Now, he didn't go inside the temple, but he went into the temple courts. Inside the temple was only for the priests. And if we remember back in 2 Chronicles, Uzziah made that mistake. And I'll just read that passage to you. It says, but after Uzziah became powerful, his pride led to his downfall. We've heard that before, right? Pride leadeth to falling. He said, Uzziah was unfaithful to the Lord his God, and he entered into the temple of the Lord to burn incense at the altar of incense. That was against God's rules. Only the priests were allowed to go into the temple. So Hezekiah went to the courts of the temple, but he brought it to God's house. And it says that Hezekiah, he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, that was the chief of staff, that was his number one person, and Shebna, the secretary, I guess that person was there to record what was going on, and senior priests. Now, in this case, one of the guys that went to meet with Rabshakeh, he wasn't invited, but he was, the recorder wasn't invited, but he was substituted with these religious leaders. And the religious leaders, it says, were covered with sackcloth also. So this is an indication, this is a pretty serious thing to these folks, and they're going to the house of the Lord. And they then go to the prophet Isaiah. So Hezekiah sends these people to the prophet Isaiah, who is the son of Amoz. And it says, they said to Isaiah, thus says Hezekiah. Whew. He's troubled. He says, this is a day of distress, of rebuke, of disgrace. Children have come to the point of birth, and there's no strength to bring them forth. So the narrative uses this analogy here of a mother who has been through such a difficult labor that she can't even expel the baby. And this is a picture of what's going on in Jerusalem. They are so troubled by everything that's going on, they are almost without strength to go on. So they only have one recourse, and where is that strength going to come from? Of course, God, right? And it goes on to say in verse 4, it may be that the Lord your God will hear the words of the Rabshakeh, whom his master the king of Assyria has sent to mock the living God, and will rebuke the words that the Lord your God has heard. Therefore lift up your prayer, for the remnant is left. So they're expressing to Isaiah that they're hoping that God understands the blasphemies of the Rabshakeh. And that's sort of a silly thing, actually, because we know that God knows everything, and he was privy to what the words the Rabshakeh spoke. But the priests and the emissaries from Hezekiah are asking Isaiah, that is, to remember the blasphemies that were perpetrated by the Rabshakeh. And then he's praying for this prayer of salvation at the very end. It says, lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left. Help us. We are here. We are begging you, he's saying, to help us through this situation. Then verse 5 says, when the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, there's just too many ayahs here. I'm sorry. I'm having trouble. When the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, say to your master. So Isaiah's responding to these emissaries from Hezekiah. He says, thus saith the Lord. So when he uses those terms, thus saith the Lord, Isaiah is affirming that he is a prophet speaking for God. So these are going to be God's words that are coming through Isaiah. And what does God say? He says, and this has to be very comforting, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid because of the words that you have heard. So what they're actually saying here is, the Rabshakeh's words are cheap. They mean nothing. It's his actions that you should be worried about, but his words, don't worry about them at this point. And then he has this sort of little dig at the Rabshakeh. He says, the words with which the young men of the king of Assyria have reviled me. Well, this is a dig at these guys, at the Rabshakeh, I should say. Because when it says these young men of the king of Assyria, what he's actually saying is that he's belittling these people. These young men could be said, the errand boys. The guys that they just carry the water for the king. They really don't have any authority here. Don't worry about what they say. It's like, these are the bullies, but they have nothing to back it up with. Even though there's hundreds of thousands of warriors out there beyond the gate, that's nothing compared to the strength of God. And then in verse 7, God goes on to say, behold, I put a spirit in him, that would be the Rabshakeh, so that he shall hear a rumor. It might not even be true, but he hears this message, and he's going to return to his own land, and on the way, I will make him fall by the sword in his own land. He's going to die. God is going to tell the Rabshakeh, you need to go back because something's going on there that you need to attend to. And on the way, God's going to take him out. Pow, done. All those words that he spoke that were terrorizing the people, he's not around anymore. That's got to be pretty encouraging to the people in Jerusalem. And it says in verse 8, indeed, that is exactly what happened. The Rabshakeh returned, and he found the king of Assyria fighting against Libnah, for he had heard that the king had left Lachish. Now, last week we talked about Lachish was 35 miles away from Jerusalem, and that the king of Assyria was working to conquer that city, and now he's moved from there to Libnah. And it says in verse 9, now the king, that would be the king of Assyria, heard concerning Tirhakah, the king of Cush, Cush would be the Egyptian guys, he has set out to fight against you. So now the Egyptians are getting into the fight. It's like wrestling, isn't it? Where you tag team wrestling here, where you got everybody wanting to get involved in the conflict. He said he has set out to fight against you, and when he heard it, he sent messengers to Hezekiah saying, "Thus shall you speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah. Do not let your God, in whom you trust, deceive you by promising that Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria." So get the picture here. The king of Assyria is fighting this city. The Egyptians get involved. Jerusalem and Hezekiah have been thinking about allying with Egypt to be able to withstand Assyria. Assyria says, even though Egypt is getting involved, your God isn't going to help you in this situation no matter what, because I'm strong. And then he's going to say to them, them, and I can prove it because I have a history behind me. And he says, "Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done in all your lands. This is what I've done before. So don't trust in your God, because you have to look at what has actually happened." And he says, "Have done to all the lands, devoted them to destruction. And shall you be delivered?" So the message to Hezekiah says, look what I've already done. Why would you absolutely think that I'm not going to do the same thing to you? And he goes on to say, "Have the gods of the nations delivered them?" Well, he doesn't realize the gods of those nations were not the God Yahweh, the God of the universe. He says, "Have they not, the nations that my fathers destroyed?" And then he names them: Gazam, Haram, Rezeph, and the people of Eden who were in Telasar. Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arpad, the king of Sepharvaim, the king of Hena, the king of Iva? So he said, look at the record here. I'm strong. I'm the king of Assyria. I've conquered everything. Their gods haven't helped them. Why in the world would you think you have any security and that you're going to be able to withstand my onslaught? Well, verse 14 says, Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. Whew, that's not a good thing. But Hezekiah responded like he should. He said he went to the house of the Lord and he spread it out before the Lord. So this is a good thing for us. When we're challenged, when we're worried about something, when there's a threat, or where there's a crisis, the first thing we should do is spread it out before the Lord. Now, I know a lot of you guys journal, and that's a great way to do that, to lay out your problems in writing, for the Lord to see, and for you, for your benefit as well. And that's exactly what Hezekiah is doing here. And this is a ploy that Satan is using here. The king of Assyria is telling him about the threats, of the reality that's happened. And he's asking Hezekiah to compare him to what's happening someplace else. But there need not be a comparison. They could be absolutely separate issues. So those nations that the Assyrian king conquered, they were under one economy, but Jerusalem is under another economy, and that economy is run by the God of the universe. So you needn't compare one to the other. They are separate issues. And we have the same problem, I think, sometimes. We compare our others' problems and we assimilate those into our own thinking, and sometimes that's a challenge to our faith. So he spreads out this message from the king of Assyria before the Lord in the house of the Lord. And then he prays to the Lord. And I was thinking about prayer. I'd never thought about this before. Prayer is an amazing gift from God. He gave it to us. to be able to communicate with the God of the universe, and not only to be able to just talk to him, but also to receive from him. It's an amazing gift, prayer. And here's what Hezekiah prays. He said, "O Lord of hosts." What he's saying here, Lord, you are so strong. You have the armies of the universe behind you. O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, you are the covenant God. You are a God of promise. And I'm embracing that. Enthroned above the cherubim, he sits in the heavenly realms. You are God, you alone. These other nations didn't have a God alone. They had idols, and they were polytheistics. And then Hezekiah goes on to say, of all the kingdoms of the earth, you are God. You have made the heavens and the earth. You are the creator God. This is a great prayer. This is honoring God and characterizing his attributes in prayer before him on his altar. And then Hezekiah, he has the ask. He says, incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. And hear the words of Sennacherib. Sennacherib is the king of Assyria. And those words, he says, which he has sent to mock the living God. Well, it's sort of curious that Hezekiah tells God to open his eyes and open his ears, because we know God's already done that. But he's just laying the foundation for his plea. He says, truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste to all the nations, all the land. So he's dealing with the reality of the situation. He knows that Assyria has been extremely effective in their conquest of that region. Then he says, and have cast their gods into the fire. So Hezekiah recognizes those idols were of no use to those people, and he's comparing them to the God of the universe who will be his protector. And he said, for they were no gods, but the work of man's hands, wood and stone, and therefore they were destroyed. So now God, he pleads, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are God. So it's not just a plea to save us, but a recognition that God's omnipotent power and his covenant grace with this nation of Israel will be a witness to the entire world. What a great recognition. What a mature recognition of Hezekiah. What a godly recognition that is. Again, when we pray, are we praying for ourselves, or are we praying for God to be glorified? Well, Hezekiah prays that to God, and then Isaiah, the son of Amos, sent to Hezekiah saying, thus saith the Lord, again speaking for God. Now, how Isaiah knew what Hezekiah prayed only could have come through a supernatural way from God to him. And it says, the God of Israel, because you have prayed to him. So the first issue here is you have to pray. You have to lay out the request. It reminds me of these missionaries that came back from 30 years in the field. And this was in the 20s. They get off the boat in New York City, and there's a celebrity on the boat as well. Celebrity gets off, dozens of press and reporters and people wanting an interview with them come around them and want their time. The missionaries get off the boat, and there's nothing. Nobody to greet them after spending 30 years with the Lord. But the message was, you've already received all the celebration because you served me. Or like the people that the missionary, the person that was very, very faithful to God, and he saw a friend, he saw that there was a lottery being, the lottery that you buy the ticket for. He said, if we just buy a lottery ticket, everything will be right. So they went out and bought a lottery ticket. I messed that. Forget it. We'll go on. I should have practiced more. I'm sorry. Oh, wait. So he says, because you prayed for me concerning Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, this is the word the Lord has spoken concerning him. So Isaiah is relating what God says concerning Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. He says, now this is speaking of Jerusalem, she despises you, she scorns you, the virgin daughter of Zion. The virgin daughter here refers to the fact that no marauders have attacked her yet. She's still free from having to war against the Assyrians. She wags her head behind you, the daughter of Jerusalem. Whom have you mocked and reviled? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes to the heights? Against the Holy One of Israel. So he's reminding Sennacherib that he wasn't reviling Jerusalem or the Israelites. He was reviling the God of the universe. And he goes on to say, by your servants you have mocked the Lord. You have said, with my chariots, with my worldly possessions, with my worldly strength, with my chariots I have gone up the heights of the mountains and the far reaches of Lebanon. To cut down the tallest cedars, its choicest cypress, to come to the remotest height, its most fruitful forest, to dig wells and to drink waters, to dry up the soul of my food, all the streams of Egypt. So what Isaiah is saying that the Lord has told him is that he acknowledges that Assyria is claiming all this conquest, all these actions that have happened because of their strength. This is what they've done. They've had a lot of chariots, they've had a lot of men, they've had a lot of success, a lot of conquests, even all the way to Egypt. And what's the response? In verse 28, have you not heard that I, God, determined it long ago? I planned from days of old what now I bring to pass, that you should make fortified cities crash into ruins. It's God who caused these things to happen. It's God who directed the paths of Assyria. It wasn't the Assyrians. They were only acting as agents of God. He says, with your inhabitants shorn of strength or dismayed and confounded, and have become like plants of the field and tender grass, like grass on the housetops, blighted before it is grown. He acknowledges everything that's being done, but it's not because of Assyria's strength. It's because God has directed that path. And then it says, God speaking, I know you're sitting down, and you're going out, and you're coming in, and you're raging against me. God knows all that. God knows everything we do. This is God's omniscience. He knows everything. And he says, because you have raged against me, and your complacency has come to my ears. And here's the key note. This is going to be bad news for the Assyrians. I will put a hook in your nose and a bit in your mouth. And that's exactly what the Assyrians did to the people that they conquered to take the captives back to Assyria. They put a hook in their nose and they drug them back to Assyria. That's what God said he's going to do to the Assyrians. And I will turn you back on the way by which you came. You are going to turn away. You're going to turn away from Jerusalem, and you're going to go back with your tail between your legs, and you will not be successful. Good words, huh? For Hezekiah and all those all the Jews that there are in Jerusalem. And now God changes from talking about the king of Assyria to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And he says, and this shall be a sign to you. This year you shall eat what grows of itself. So you're going to be able to have food. You're going to be able to have some prosperity, but it's going to be natural. And then in the second year, what springs from that? Now there's going to be the beginning of an agricultural boom. And then in the third year, you'll sow and reap and plant vineyards and eat their fruit. So God has a 3-year plan for the revival of Jerusalem. They'll finally end up in them enjoying prosperity and health. And it says, and the surviving remnant of the house of Jerusalem shall take root downward and bear fruit upward. So they're going to be founded in God, founded in obedience, founded in worshiping the true God, and from that they're going to bear fruit, and that fruit is going to be clear to all the nations of the world. And then it says, for out of Jerusalem shall go a remnant, and out of Mount Zion a band of survivors. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. God is in control, God's going to save you, and it's going to be a wonderful time. Then he switches back to the king of Assyria. It's in verse 33. It says, therefore, thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, you shall not come into this city or shoot an arrow, not a single arrow, there, or come before it with shield of cast up a siege mound against it. Assyria is not going to attack Jerusalem. This is the promise that God is making to Hezekiah. And we know historically that's exactly what happened. And when it says that not a shot and an arrow, there will not be a shot or an arrow there, Herodias, the Roman historian, recounts that in the camp of the Assyrians, it was rife with rodents, rats. And the rats were so plentiful that they actually gnawed at the arrows of the Assyrians and destroyed them. So they had no armaments to be able to attack Jerusalem. And that same account is also in Egyptian lore as well. So sounds like it could be true. So it says in verse 30, by the way he came, by the same he shall return, shall not come into the city. They will retreat. They will retreat back to Assyria. And why? He says, for I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. And this is the Davidic promise that we find here in Psalm 89. It says, I have made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David my servant, I will establish your line forever and make your throne firm through all generations. And I think we're living in a time of that Davidic covenant is still in play right now. So when you read about what's going on in the Middle East, hold on to the truth of the Davidic covenant. God is going to protect the nation of Israel. And then this amazing thing that happens in verse 36. And the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. The angel of the Lord wipes them out. How? Don't know. Plague? Who knows? But the fact that there's a specific number given to that leads credibility to the fact that there was specifically that many people that were killed. And when the people arose early in the morning, behold, wow, look at all these dead bodies around here. These were all dead bodies, they said. Then Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, departed. I guess you would, wouldn't you, if your whole army was decimated, and returned home to live in Nineveh. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. And it says Sennacherib worshipped in the house of Nisroch, his god. His god was an omnipotent. He didn't protect Sennacherib, because it says his sons came and killed him. Sort of the end of the story for that guy. God is in control. So major theme here that we have is that, God comes to chastise his people. We saw that in a lot of John's teaching, that there's a lot of chastisement going on. But he doesn't destroy them. He uses that chastisement to grow them. And it's the same with us. There are times when God chastises us, has us pay attention to the sin in our lives, but to grow us. And the blessing then comes from the discipline that we receive, and prosperity even from the suffering, and life through death. So God has this long-term view, as you would expect him to have, right? And his long-term view is preserving that line of David. And he's a covenant God, and he's a God that keeps promises. And that's good news for us too, because we have a covenant with him as well. And we have that security that he's going to keep that promise. And we're going to enjoy this eternal life of joy and bliss and worship. And it's just a beautiful picture. So that's what we have here. The Assyrians, I think, have been pretty much taken care of. And I think John next week will talk about some other guys that come into the picture. But as far as the Assyrians go, God has taken care of them. So that's the story of chapter 37.